I started by designing the template on a cardstock or paper and then tracing it out onto a thin piece of foam. I then did the same on my pieces of fur. For these ears I used two types of fur, so I only had to cut two templates out of each fur. I used an X-Acto knife when cutting out the patterns so I wouldn't cut the actual fur, and I cut just outside the lines to leave a little bit of a seam allowance on my pattern. I used a longer fur for the inside of the ear and a shorter fur for the outside. When tracing out your pattern, you want to flip the template on your second piece so it is a mirrored image of the first. For this pattern it really didn't matter though because it was a dome shape and it was the same on both sides. I then took some trimmers to the long hair and I started to trace out what I wanted the ear to look like. I really wanted to make her inner ears look really fluffy, so I only shaved about 2/3 of the ear and left the rest long still. I repeated the same step on the other side. Sure, each piece is a mirrored image of each other and they're not shaved on the same side or the ears won't turn out. For my next step, I decided to paint the ears by hand. Start by diluting the paint, 1 part paint, 1 part water, and then dab it onto the fur and then brush it out with an old ratty brush. Push the hair in every direction to really get the paint in there, and if there's any missed spots, you just go back and add more paint and then brush it out again. Also go back several times as it's drying to brush it out again and make sure that it turns out nice and smooth. The inner ear I wanted a lighter, more gradient brown, so I dabbed a little bit of brown in the middle and then brushed it out to the edges. I wanted just a little touch of color in the longer hairs, so I added the tiniest little spot to the bottom and I brushed it through into the long hairs until it was like a light beige. Then repeated the same steps on the other side. Kept the other ear nearby as a close reference, so I knew just how much color to add to the second ear. The more watered down your paint is, the easier it will be to blend. Mine was like a milky consistency. It was very watery. For this, I actually just used acrylic paint from the dollar store. Once you've brushed it all out and you're satisfied, you can leave them out to dry. It's time to start strengthening the inside of the ear. Back periodically with the blow dryer to help speed up the drying process, especially on the outside of the ears because they were so wet compared to the inside. What I'm mainly doing is adding a thin wire to the foam piece for stability. This will allow you to bend the ear in any shape and it will stay in that shape. So I tack down the outsides and then the very middle at first, and then once that's all dry, I completely cover the wire with hot glue. Video you'll see me go back to the fur pieces several times and brush them. It's to help as it dries, it'll help to separate the hairs and make it look smoother. So the next step would be sewing the ear pieces together, and for this you want to make sure that the ears are completely dry. Most people, just let it sit for the night, but I wanted to get this done in one sitting, so I was using the blow dryer to help speed up the process, and they dried fairly quickly. You can use a sewing machine if you know that your sewing machine will survive, but mine was like the cheapest one I could get from Walmart, so I did this by hand just to make sure that I didn't kill my machine. I sewed along the edge of the ear, leaving the inside or the bottom piece open so I could flip it out and add the foam piece after. When you flip it right side out again, you might notice that the hair got stuck in between the threads when you were sewing. So you can go and either pluck it with your fingers, or I actually went later on in the video and plucked it out with a little sewing needle. I realized that the hair was very long, so I decided to trim it and style it a bit at the top of the ear there, just to make a better shape. Next step was to insert the foam into the ear and hot glue the foam to the fur on both sides. Don't want to push too hard because the glue can actually seep through the fabric and ruin the fur on top. Now, I didn't feel like the ears were quite floofy enough, so I added little pieces of white fur. I styled them first and then I glued them on at the very end to the bottom of the ear just to make it floofier. Once it was glued on to the ear, I took my scissors again and I styled it and made it a little bit shorter because that hair was really long. And then I took the brush and I made sure it was all brushed out and looking all pretty, And that was it for the first ear. I then went back and I had to repeat all the steps on the second ear. When you're sewing the two pieces together, you want to try to tuck as much of the hair, especially the long hair, into the ear as possible. Doing so will just make it easier once you turn it inside out to pluck all the hairs out from in between the seam. I used a white thread to sew the ears together because I figured that would be easiest to hide against the white fur in the front, but brown or beige would have worked just as well. And of course I have to match this ear up to the other ear, so I kind of compared the two and I started to trim all the longer hairs. Working with fake fur can be very messy, so I would recommend working somewhere where you can sweep or vacuum up after and not be in a carpeted area. For me, I have my dogs, so I wasn't really bothered, but yeah, the hair really gets everywhere. Now that the second ear is almost ready, it's time to brush. Again, you insert the foam piece in between the two fur pieces again, and once you're happy with the placement, you can glue it in. The other side, I decided to add that fur piece, so here I am just making a matching one for the other side and gluing that on just as I did the first one. Here's the finishing touches of styling the ears and trimming any pieces that look longer than the other, and then you're basically ready for the final step. As a final step, I added clips to the base of the ears. You can use a headband, but I prefer clips because it's a more realistic look. And voila, you're done!